Hello and welcome back. My name is Dr. Christopher Gennari, and this is History 101, the Great Big History Podcast, Episode 8, Cities at the Start of the World, Mesopotamia, from Sumer to Sargon. In this episode, we start to go from the generic nomadic peoples, settled peoples, to start to talk about specific peoples, Sumerians, Akkadians. And we talk about Mesopotamia. Now, the process that's going on here is similar to what will happen in Egypt and India and China around the same time, a little later, a couple hundred years later, but in terms of human existence, about the same time. And so Mesopotamia is literally the land between two rivers. If you're looking at the video, there's the outline of the two rivers in a nice blue, nice teal. There's the Tigris, Tigris. That's the northern river. It's the faster flowing of the rivers. It's the steeper one. It's the less useful of the two in the ancient world. And the Euphrates, Euphrates, that's the southern river. And the Euphrates is the big river. Not that the Tigris isn't, but the Euphrates is the river of the two. It's the big brother. It's the more important of the two in the ancient world. Now, Mesopotamia also bound north and south by the Tarsus Mountains and the Persian Gulf. So it does not include the mountains and the plateau that will become Persia and Iran. It does not include the deserts of what will become Saudi Arabia and Jordan. It does include, culturally at least, the Levant. Levant, which is the eastern coast of the Mediterranean Sea. It's the modern Sinai, modern Israel, Gaza, and the West Bank, Lebanon, and Syria. All of that. And probably Jordan, Transjordan, as well, is known as the Levant, the eastern coast of the Mediterranean Sea. Culturally, it's part of Mesopotamia. All those are Mesopotamian lands. But when we speak of Mesopotamia, we really speak of the land between the two rivers, between the Tigris and Euphrates. Modern-day Iraq, parts of Syria, into the eastern part of Turkey today. And so, if you take a look at the map, it's bounded by peoples. So we have the Mesopotamian area, that's the land of the two rivers, plus the Levant. And then to its southwest, is Egypt, which is a different culture. And to its northwest are the Hittites, which themselves are a different culture. So Mesopotamians are the people of these two rivers. The Hittites we'll talk about later. They're mountain folk. They'll be important as a competitor to the Mesopotamians, but they are culturally different. They're Hittites. And then there's the Egyptians, who are also going to be a competitor, foil, trade partner, but are also a different culture. Even though there'll be a lot of connections, the Egyptians and the Hittites are different than Mesopotamians. They thought of themselves as different. They acted as different. So the earliest cities start in what's called Sumer, Sumer, at the bottom of the two rivers, where the two rivers meet the Persian Gulf. Now, in the ancient world, those two rivers flowed separately into the Persian Gulf. Today, they have filled in with sediment so much land, so much now marshland and land, that the two rivers now connect, they meet. But in the ancient world, they didn't. They met the Persian Gulf separately. And so if you're in Sumer, around 3000 or so BC, you got civilization. You started to build cities. You got land. You had money. But there are rules, because remember, there are kings. If you want freedom, if you want more land, or to start over, adventure to make a name for yourself, you want to just be on your own and get away from it all, you had to move upriver, start a new farm, make a new government for your protection. Remember, nomads are still out there. And then you make a city, and then the situation repeats. So as time goes on, 5000 BC, 4000 BC, 3000 BC, cities are beginning to move up those rivers as people starting at the south in Sumeria get like there's no place for them to move up. The land is all taken. They want to start over. They want to adventure. They want to get better farmland with less competition. So they move up the river. And so the middle of those rivers are called Acadia. They will later be called Babylonia because of the city of Babylon will be located there. And then the far north, the last third or so of those rivers that reach the mountains are known as they're the frontier. There's less and less people as you go farther north, and that name will eventually be called Assyria because that will be an empire that will grow out of there. But really, it's a frontier. Like if you're the Sumerians, you didn't have a name for Assyria. It was just the far north. It was a frontier. It had less people, less government. It's more wild and more violent as well, as people are carving out civilization. In some ways, it's very much, as you go north on the Mesopotamian rivers, it's kind of like going west in the American history. It's carving out a civilization. It's violence against other settled people. It's violence against nomadic peoples who were there, who were hanging out. So there's a lot of violence in this as they carve out a life that starts with a farm, and then you make a government to protect yourself, and then you make a city because you have to build walls to protect yourself. And then people get upset with that, and they go, well, I want to be on my own again. And they move up the river. So we see this progression of people moving up the river as population increases and people are looking to make a better life for themselves. All right, so Sumer is the densest part of the rivers. We've talked about this. It has the most people, which means it has more food, it has more cities, it has more trade, it has more money, it has more education. It is a better life. The people who live in Sumer have a better life. And up the river are people who are poorer, dumber, and harder. They have a harder life because they're poorer and dumber. But they will tell you they're freer and they're tougher. And this is a kind of rural versus urban divide that we still see today. In America, we still see it today, right? The people who live in New York are in Philly are, rich and sophisticated. And the people who live outside in the rural areas are dumb hicks. And meanwhile, the dumb hicks are like, we know real life. We live in the real world. I don't eat Grey Poupon on everything. And we're freer. We're freer and we're tougher. Have you ever watched the movie Jaws? This is the last, when the guys go out on the boats, the three men go out on the boats. This is very much the dynamic between the three, right? The working class fisherman, right? The upper class elite university guy, and the blue collar cop. And you see this class war go between them. This is also, Mesopotamia is going to essentially invent armies. Organized men, organized soldiers, not warriors. Like, remember, nomadic societies are all warriors. Everyone can fight. But now we're going to create armies. That is a group of men who fight who are separate from the rest of the economy. Now, we don't have yet professional soldiers, but we'll talk about that. We don't have standing armies. They're way too expensive. So let's talk about how do we get armies? Well, successful cities equal more children live. which equals more people. More people need more food. So how do you make more food? Well, either you need better education and better technology, more efficiency to get more food literally out of every acre, or you need more land. And you can understand at the beginning of civilization, more land is the essential answer. We will talk about some inventions that make farming more efficient. Bronze, the lunar calendar. But we don't have an education system to better spread this knowledge, this technology. And so it's easier to just harvest more land. So the problem is other cities are going to need more land too. And so let's watch. We have our two cities with our two dots on a river. At the moment, when we start, they're separated. And what happens is they need to start cultivating land around them. That's our green circle. So each of the little dots has a green circle around it, green semicircle going from the river around the city to the river. All right, so you got a dot surrounded by a half a circle. Right? And the other city has a dot surrounded by half a circle. And now what happens over time? Well, as you more people, those circles get bigger as you cultivate more land. And they get bigger until they overlap, which means each city needs the same land. They need the same land in order to create food to feed their people. Well, if both cities need the same land, who gets it? They both need it, otherwise people in their city will starve. So what they'll decide to do is fight. They will fight other cities for essential land for food. As the population grows, they need that land. So they will have to fight their neighbors in order to control the land, in order for their farmers to farm, to make the food to feed their people. So now you need an army. Why? Because remember, we built city walls to keep out people as well as horses. So now you need a military that can, one, lay siege to a city, starve it, which means surrounding a city for many months so it can't go out and farm its own land, and no supplies can come into it, and or two, break down the walls, which means you need to invent machines that can help break down the walls. Right? Yes, you can dig under them. You can build ladders to go over them. But the guys on the other side of the walls, inside the walls, know this. And so they're going to create defenses like boiling oil and fire and giant rocks that crush your head. So ultimately, you're going to need machines that can break down the walls. So now, what do you have to invent? You have to invent engineering. You have to invent applied mathematics. Plus, you need logistics. And logistics is the procurement and the shipping of things, of stuff. It's kind of like Amazon. Amazon is more, UPS and FedEx are logistics companies. They are very good at getting a thing, organizing it, shipping it, and getting it to the place where it has to go. And so now what we need is a group of military people who know how to fight with spears, pretty much. We don't really have the technology to make swords and giant iron or bronze weapons. So it's going to mostly be spears. Because remember, you now have to mass produce this stuff for, 5,000 people. So most cities won't have that ability. So you make spears so that you need a staff of wood, and then you put a metal piece at the top. You could even use bronze. You could even use rock if you have to, but you'll eventually use copper and then bronze. And much, much later, we'll get to iron. But we have to invent soldiers who can now not farm, but now lay siege to cities, which means they have to get paid. They have to be fed. That's your logistics. You have to ship them food. You have to ship them water. You have to ship them money. Because if they don't get paid, they're going to leave. If they don't get food, they're going to leave. So they have to lay siege to a city. And then they have to build machines. Ultimately, we'll get catapults and ballistae and things that break down these walls. All of this takes time, and it takes an immense amount of money. In this class, in history, an army is the most expensive thing humans have ever invented. You need to do 5, 10, 20,000 men and feed them, and then pay them a living wage. It's immensely expensive for a state to do. So what do we get? We get the rise of super cities. Uruk, Nippur, Nippur, which have 30 to 50,000 people. Now, a typical Mesopotamian city will have 5,000, 8,000 people. But and Uruk will have 30 to 50,000. Nippur will have 30 to 50,000 people, because they'll absorb the land and the cities around them. So what happens? Well, sooner or later, you have to get something that's even bigger. There has to be, if the rise of super cities, well, sooner or later, there's going to be somebody who's going to want to take everything, right? And that is Sargon. Sargon of Akkad. You get the rise of the imperialist king. Sargon is the first person who conquers the known world. He had a map, and he owned everything on that map as he understood it. From sea, Mesopotamian Sea, to sea, the Persian Gulf. And he said, everything there, I own. How did he do that? How did Sargon become the first world conqueror? Well, he did it with a mercenary army of professional soldiers. He hired people who knew how to fight. Remember, they fight farmers who don't know how to fight? Well, now he's going to pay people who know how to fight, who were in other people's armies. So these are guys who were in an army and don't want to go back to being farmers. They're like, oh, this is way cooler. So now they sell their skills to other kings. And there's always some kings who are fighting with somebody else, right? The thing about mercenaries, though, is they are immensely expensive. We use mercenaries. Americans use mercenaries. We use them in Iraq. We use them in Afghanistan. We call them private contractors, but they're mercenaries. And they cost 3 to 4 times the average pay of a regular soldier. And most of them have been soldiers. And now they'll sell their services to a company that sells their services to other countries. So if you have a mercenary army, this costs a lot of money. So most people cannot have a mercenary army. But you can make a lot more money if it wins. If you lose, you're in a lot of trouble. But if you win, you can levy taxes on the people. You don't even have to take the land. You bring your army to a place, you beat people up, and you say, okay, you're going to give me 20% now off the top, which is essentially what the locusts do in A Bug's Life to the ants. Is what the bandits do in the Seven Samurai. It's they come in and say, you're going to pay taxes to us, and we won't hurt you. We won't take more. That's the idea. So you can make more money and then pay your army. The problem is you need to conquer new places in order to pay for your previous wars, which means no peace. There's no point at which Sargon sat back and said, peace. That wasn't the goal. He had to conquer new places in order to pay for his mercenary army, because otherwise the mercenaries would go home or somewhere else or be hired by somebody, which means they would then attack Sargon. So it was war without end. Kind of how Napoleon worked, or how the Nazis worked. How you constantly had to pay for the last war by winning a new war. And Sargon wins. He keeps winning. He levies taxes, he keeps winning. This creates a new form of legitimacy. Whether you like it or not, and this will become, in a lot of ways, history until the 20th century, is the story of these conquerors. The new form of legitimacy is subjugation, is conquering. It used to be protection. Legitimacy used to be you built walls and you protected people from getting invaded. Now, you want to be the big dog on the block? You want to be like Sargon? You conquer other people's cities. That's Alexander. That's Caesar. That's Napoleon. That's the British Empire. That's the Nazi Empire. Legitimacy is found in conquering other people and taking their stuff. Now, you can dress it up all you want, but the people who get conquered didn't want you there, and you did it by force. And then you took their stuff, whether they wanted to give it to you or not. So that's the new form of legitimacy. Or it's a new form. You can now choose, right? Now remember, if you were a chief in a nomadic horse tribe, your form of legitimacy was survival. Then if you became a king, like Gritty, of a small city, it was protection. You built walls, right? You protected people from nomads. Now, a new form of legitimacy is subjugation, is conquering. And there will be, the great conquerors will be some of the most famous people in all of history. It is going to become the story of history. Alexander, Caesar, Napoleon, David in your Old Testament. David defeats the other Canaanite tribes, right? He defeats Goliath in mano-a-mano battle. And so that's the poison pill that is Sargon. Sargon figured out if you could conquer other people, you can get them to pay you to not hurt them more. You could pay, basically the mafia version of history. So what's the problem? Well, if you come at the king, man, you better not miss. Mercenaries are expensive, and they will fight for whoever pays them. 2, enemies that you defeat hate you. You killed their people, you took their money, you threatened them with future violence. And that is a trauma. They are traumatized by what happened to them. And one way they answer, they go, why did this happen to us? And the answer was, we didn't have a strong enough army. We should get a strong enough army and then do it to them. 3, soldiers are not nice to civilians and never have been, especially women. And that upsets people. When they kidnap women, they rape women, they take daughters. And even if they don't do it violently, they show up with money. Like Americans during World War II. And they show up with money, and they basically pay local women to become prostitutes. Well, if you're their mom and your dad, and you're destitute, and now your daughter's a prostitute to the foreign conquerors, how do you feel about the foreign conquerors? Are you happy? It was the British thing, the British thing about the Americans was a complaint in the British Army was Americans are overpaid, oversexed, and over here. Meaning in England. Meaning they showed up with their money and suddenly all the British women were like, oh, hi. And so is that rape? No. But is anybody happy with this situation? No. Are people being coerced into sex with money? Yes. And nobody likes this situation. Well, the conquerors like that situation, but they have violence on their side. So this is a story wherever armies go, women are always in one way, shape, or form abused. Always. Just always. By the local soldiers. And that is true for modern American soldiers, as it was true for ancient Greek soldiers, as it was true for Turkish soldiers in the middle. It is always true. Number 4. What happens after a conqueror dies or he gets old? What happens to all that money? What happens to the loyalty of the army? What happens to enemies? Sargon dies, and his son goes, "Hi, I'm Sargon too. I'm going to be really tough like my dad." And all of those people said, no. You know? Nah, you're not Sargon. Nah. Sons, juniors have a very hard time being as awesome as their dads. Like, it's tough. Philip gives way to Alexander, and Philip's forgotten, but Philip was the man for a while. So it happens. David and Solomon, pretty good. But for most times, it's a father who people respect or are afraid of, and then the son comes along and goes, "Hi, I'm the son, I'm junior." And people are like, yeah. And then you get revolts, and you get wars, and you get all that anger. This is the end of the Qin, Qin, in China, the first emperor. The first emperor scared the hell out of everybody. He died. His son said, I'm gonna be really tough. And the rest of China said, yeah, no. Just no. Nah. Your dad scared us. You don't scare us, son. And they revolted, and China broke apart, and the Qin ended in fire and death. Which means legitimacy in this method only extends as far as the sword, as far as you can extend it, as far as you can defeat your enemies, pay your army. So, dude, if you come at the king, you best not miss. Thank you. See you soon. Be safe. We invented new legitimacy. We invented new armies. We invented a whole new way that this class is going to interact. And we're going to invent a new method when we talk about Babylon next. Be safe.